start here. So, reading in Matthew 19, some Pharisees came to him and tested him. They asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? Haven't you read," he replied, that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female and said, "For this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate." "Why then," they asked, "did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away?" Jesus replied, "Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard, but it was not this way from the beginning. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another woman commits adultery." Okay. Tough verses here. One thing that's a little bit different here about Jesus' approach is it sounds a little bit more like a more specific command he deals with when he deals with this particular test that the Pharisees bring before him. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about the test. So there are two very definite schools of rabbinic thought about divorce during this period. There was the Shammai school and the Hillel school. The Shammai school would be what we would probably call a real conservative school on this topic. They were very much that the verse around their certificate of divorce in, I believe it's Deuteronomy, it's one of either Leviticus or Deuteronomy, uses the term, any form you may divorce your wife for any form of indecency. It's kind of the language that's used. And the Shammai talk treated indecency as a very, very strong word. That you've done something that bring, like having an affair that would bring complete dishonor to your household, and so they were very stringent on how you could get these certificates written. The Hillel school was a very, very open school on just about anything. You could consider it indecent behavior if your wife burned your dinner one night. You can consider that indecent behavior. And so people were getting. There are people that wanted to follow the Hillel school were getting divorced for any reason whatsoever. Just basically they found something they did not like and they got out of the marriage. And so those were competing thoughts. And so the Pharisees were trying to get Jesus to come down on one side or the other, and then hope to have him alienate himself from people that were on the other side, effectively. One thing to make this even stronger, if you look at this similar passage in both Mark and Luke, the adultery out clause is not mentioned. The same verbiage is kind of used there with without the adultery out clause. Now, I think personally we've sometimes used this verse use these passages to do some things that are not great. I think what Jesus certainly is saying, marriage is eternal. One of the things we do talk about is, I think the fact that we use the term "what God has joined, let no man tear asunder." We like putting that in our marriage vows. We like putting that verse. I definitely think Christ is saying that is a very serious commitment here. I don't think, sometimes I think, we use this to try to convince people to stay in an abusive relationship, and I don't think that's what Christ meant here. That we'll say, well, he's not cheating on you, so even if he is beating you and making you miserable, find a way to stick it out. I don't think that is what he's implying here. Again, most of what Christ always says is, stop looking for the out clause. You know, that is the more typical way that Christ approaches these types of things. And that, if you're looking for the out clause, if you're looking for, okay, this is the reason I can get divorced, you're asking the wrong question here. You know, I don't think he's trying to say that you have to stay. You know, I think that's a little bit different than saying, okay, there's no situation where you can get divorced, as much as if you're going and looking for the out clause, that's really more of the issue here. I'm going to leave that open right now. I definitely want, if someone wants.
Do you think he's talking mostly to men here?
So that's another good question. Is because certainly the language would indicate that he is, sort of. And now part of that is the society was very patriarchal. And I do think that's also a hard way, you know, that we apply it. That and then in some sense the women didn't have nearly as much rights in the civil governments to divorce their husbands as the husbands did to divorce their wives. And so trying to apply that in our society where, you know, where both sexes have sort of equal abilities there, I think sometimes is a little bit tricky and difficult. But I do, you know, so I do think how exactly to apply it to every situation is sometimes difficult because of that. And you know, the situation that the question came up was in an entrapment question. You know, the Pharisees were trying to get Christ to come down on one of these two sides, on either the Shammai side or the Hillel side, and thus alienate himself from the other groups. But I think it's tough.
I think mostly. I mean, I've always kind of looked at it in a patriarchal society, where basically, if a man can just divorce his wife, and basically, if that happens, I mean, he's condemning her to a life of poverty.
Right.
I mean, she's kind of untouchable after that.
It is.
And just the evilness of that kind of divorce, where you're just destroying somebody's life,
right,
is terrible.
Right.
You know, just from that standpoint. So I mean, I don't know. You know, it's hard to say that this is a situation where, you know, it's somewhat cultural, but I think you could make a good case that, I mean, he's looking at that kind of patriarchal society where people could say, "Oh, I don't like you anymore, be gone," and destroying somebody's life is being just a pretty terrible situation for her.
It's one of the things that's interesting that the Hillel school thought was that, you know, like I said, you could divorce the wife for about any reason that you felt that you could just make any reason that you felt that she wronged you somehow. But they did feel you could not divorce your wife if she actually truly was insane. And part of the reason was for what you just said, you know, because, I mean, I guess the theory is if the woman burnt your dinner, somebody might like their dinner fixed that way, and she might be able to get remarried. But if she
treating him like a god, serving him burnt offerings.
But if she was completely incapable of ever hoping to attract another mate, basically, was the theory behind it. Then, you know, it actually was a little bit stricter because, you know, in a sense, you had to pity her, you know, and keep some sort of support avenue open for her. But I do think, you know, do what?
I said I need to credit her dad for that. She said when he was early married, his wife treated him like a god. She served him Our offerings.
Like that's
Scott?
yes.
I've heard another argument kind of along these lines, but that word divorce, it means sins away. Wherever I read this, they were saying the Pharisees wouldn't do the thing that Moses required, which they still do today. I forgot what the name of it is. But money went with it. So when they signed that, and they got rid of their wife, they had to give them
sort of a dowry.
Yeah,
or
a reverse dowry.
Reverse dowry, yeah.
But if they just sent them away, well, they didn't lose their money. But they were still married because they didn't have their certificate of divorce. Therefore, they were adulterers. I read that somewhere.
And so that's, again, I think the problem is you're trying to find the loophole, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're trying to find,
Jesus explained it.
yeah. And I think that is definitely what the problem is, people are trying to find reasons not to treat marriage as this eternal commitment, and that is, and that I think is where the problem lies. I just mentioned the book of Hosea here, and obviously, again, not necessarily trying to at all imply that that is a command, but it does show, one of the things I think that is beautiful about marriage is I think God wants us to see the love He has for us model, in a sense it's a model of that. It is, we learn, the acts of love we learn here, with our relationships, we can see, what exactly God's love is for us. And, the things in order to make a marriage work, the way that you have to, the way you have to sacrifice, the way you have to overlook faults, things that you have to do in order to truly love your wife like or your wife loves her husband like you need to do. Does model what the love God has for us. And the book of Hosea just comes to me, which is certainly what that book is all about, is seeing, okay, how does God love us? And what does He do? He puts Hosea in a marriage that would be, by any stretch of the imagination, that we would call it awful. It was a horrible situation for Hosea to be in. And God wants to drive home the point that, this is what I have to experience in my love for you, but I still love you, and I do think that is, and I think that's one reason why God does make marriage wants to hold it in such esteem, so we can understand that love.
I can't understand why Mark and Luke didn't record the same word. We don't know, but
we don't know, but they did not, and again, I think it's more, I do think this is more of a principle than a law, and the principle is very much like what, we've stated before. If you're looking for the reason to get out, you're looking for the wrong thing. Not trying to say that, I don't think Christ is trying to say that there is never a situation where a person can get divorced, but if you're looking for that purpose, you're not understanding what we're trying to do here. But yes, I think it's interesting that Mark and Luke do not record, do not even mention the adultery statement in here. They both say the same thing about don't divorce, don't remarry, and do not even say that adultery would be an acceptable reason for that.
yeah.
So, a few more thoughts about this. All right. I think this is tough. This is tough. All right, we'll go on to verses 16 of Matthew 19. Just then a man came up to Jesus and asked, "Teacher, what good thing must I do to get eternal life?" "Why do you ask me about what is good?" Jesus replied. "There's only one who is good. If you want to enter life, keep the commandments." "Which ones?" he inquired. Jesus replied, "You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not give false testimony, honor your father and mother, and love your neighbor as yourself. All these all these I have kept," the young man said. "What do I still lack?" Jesus answered, "If you want to be perfect, go sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me." When the young man heard this, he went away sad because he had great wealth. All right. So, you think if you met this guy on the street and talked to him and had coffee with him or whatever, you actually think you would probably like and be impressed with this guy? I think you probably would. I mean, we're not giving a lot of definites about it, but my guess is we probably feel this guy has it all together. He probably would give the impression that he wants to serve God. I think you would probably this would be somebody that would just be, okay, this guy's a pretty great guy here. And he seems to have a very open heart. He comes to Jesus and say, I'm doing my best. What else do I need to do? I think we would. I don't think we would, have a big problem with that. Now, so Jesus says what we might say. Well, you've been, God has given you the path of what you should do to be a good person. Here are some commandments that He's given us. First of all, it's interesting He didn't mention all the commandments. What is true about the commandments that Jesus mentions to the man? As opposed, like for instance, He doesn't say, "Love your God with all your heart, all your soul, your mind." It doesn't, mention the commandment about idols. What is interesting about the commandments He actually picks to tell this man?
They're person-to-person.
They're all
commandments.
person-to-person commands, right? They're all person-to-person commands. He doesn't mention any of the ones that relate directly to God. They're all the ones that relate to our relationships with other people. And so his advice at the end is also something that would be about his relationship to other people, not his relationship to God. To show charity to other people. So it's interesting. I think it is interesting that, and the man is unable to do that. The man came to him with an open heart. Now, I would say, if someone came up to me and told me I need to sell everything and start over, that would be a tough thing for me to handle too. That would be tough. Why do you think Christ asked this man to do this?
I think it's interesting that that's not a biblical command, first off. That's not anything in the Old Testament that tells somebody which implies the authority of Christ right there. Mm-hmm. That if he's going to see him as authority from God, then that's the only time those words would carry weight.
Right.
And so basically, he's asking this individual to submit to him.
Mm-hmm.
And so that implies that he basically rejects Christ when he says, "I'm not going to follow that."
Mm-hmm. So I do think we certainly feel Christ knows what truly is keeping him. Keeping him from seeing the. He knows what's lacking. He knows the answer to the man's question. He knows what's lacking, and it's not in general that we all have to do this, but he knows that this particular man has acquired enough wealth that he has somehow elevated and separated himself from. Now I'm going to ask another question when we get to the apostles' response to this in a second. I'll wait till we get there to ask that question, but he's, gotten to a point that, he feels he is above everyone else. It is interesting, his response when Christ mentions the commands is, I've got all that squared away. I don't have any problem with any of that. Which is, we can interpret that as maybe some self-confidence. We can interpret it as arrogance, or some, not just understanding what reality is there. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways to go with that.
Basically, he's got the human commands down. What Christ is really alluding to is he needs to keep the God commands. He needs to keep the rest of the 10 Commandments. And he doesn't spell them out per se, but I mean, if you look at it, what are the other commands? They're all God related, they're all love related, and those are the ones he's missing out on.
And in the end, what is the fact that he is not? In a sense, he is having. In a sense, he has nothing in the heart.
Yeah. Money is his idol.
Right, money is his idol, and he's using his money effectively, and that's, I think, the trap we can get into if we become too sufficient on earth to kind of make sure he's able to do his checklist. And then I'll do my checklist, and I can then, if I get the checklist solved, I can live my life the way I want to. And that's kind of really where he's going. And he's not, like you said, he is not giving his heart to God. I mean, right. That's not that's not where his heart lies. All right. Any more thoughts about this? We're going to talk one more thing about this when we get to the apostles' response to this. But any more thoughts about this before I go on? All right. So then Jesus said to his disciples, "Truly I tell you, it is hard for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. Again, I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God." When the disciples heard this, they were greatly astonished and said, "Who then can be saved?" Jesus looked at them and said, "With man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible." So why is it hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven? And we've hinted on it a little bit, but why is it hard? What makes it? What's the problem? I mean, we know, and we quote from Scripture a lot. Of course, sometimes I think we quote it back because we want to defend our richness, but we do quote, that it's not money that's the root of all evil; it's the love of money that's the root of all evil. We love to make that distinction. That so why is it that if you have money, is it hard to enter?
If you have money, you're not satisfied. You want more.
Okay, that's one problem. Okay, I do think that is one problem, and that gets to the love of money. I think very differently. What is it that money does that makes us love it, and that the love of it drives us away from God? What is it that money does?
It's like the American misconception that I pull myself up by my bootstraps, by my effort. I have all that I have. Anything I want, I will take with enough effort.
Right.
And I don't owe anything to anybody. And once I've reached, billionaire, zillionaire status here, I have no need of anything.
There is an incredible it initially starts out as comfort and proceeds from there in having this self-sufficiency that money can provide.
I was going to say selfishness.
That you end up coming to the point where you feel everything you've accomplished is yours. Which allows you to start pushing God away. You start relying. You start having complete confidence in you.
Like I am the source of my blessings.
Right. I am the source of my blessings. And that keeps you away from God, and that's what's hard. If you have money, if you have enough money that you get to the point where you do feel like you are in control of your destiny, it does start to turn your eyes off of God. I mean, if you look at the people right now that are the the richest people in the world, all of them are very much having that mindset, that they, that is what I can control, what I can, how I can orchestrate life. And it's not all of them are hateful and want to do evil things, but it is this sort of self-power that they, and it's funny, you can listen to any of them talk, whether it's Musk or Gates or Bezos or any of them, they all kind of end up saying that at some point. It's like, I can use this to make the world in my image effectively, is kind of almost what they say,
Look what I have done.
that they end up, coming to that conclusion. Yes.
Like the parable of the rich fool. I will tear these barns down, I'll build bigger ones.
Yeah.
If you listen to them on TV, you'll never hear them thinking to themselves of anything that's spiritual,
right,
at all.
Yeah.
From my life experience, there's one more also. There's not. I like how you term that, the American misconception, or whatever that. I like how that was termed. But there is an accompanying one that you have a responsibility to lay up in store to take care of yourself, and that you're not to be a burden on anybody else. That's sort of also an American culture perception thing. And if you didn't do that, you make plenty of money, you work out there at the plant all that time, and there's all this negative perception about this person did or didn't do right, and they're a burden on the kids now or whatever. So to some degree, our culture, and that's always been that way in the world, but there's several of those minor things that contribute also to the self-sufficiency. You may not even want to lay back and be in need of nothing, as the master said. You may not have that haughty of a feeling. You may just feel like, I'm doing what I can to not burden anybody, and still have the same message.
Yeah. I think there's always a sort of I know personally I struggle with a battle, I guess, of what I would say, having enough faith that God will provide and being a good steward. That there's sort of an internal battle I have with myself with that. Where am I? Because I do think they're both commanded of us. We are supposed to take care. We are supposed to be a good steward of what God has provided for us, which is not only money but other talents as well. But we also need to have faith that that we don't get wrapped up in that, so that we would not be so that we don't end up concentrating on that. That God's plan is for more than for us just to hoard. Certainly, hoard is not the plan at all. But I mean, I think I'm explaining what I mean by that. I mean, there's just sort of a little struggle that I do think we're commanded to be a good steward, but I do think that sometimes we can turn that into a problem where we are, focusing on, not taking our focus off of God and focusing on the actual blessings that He's been given us, and trying to just cultivate them and think that we will end up being our provider.
There's a line in a poem Chris Christopherson wrote that says, "Freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose." And so you've got that side too.
Yeah.
Where people just, kind of get away from society and feel like, that's just, tying them down.
Yeah.
And, kind of the other side of that, which I'm not so sure that's real freedom either.
Yeah.
It's just a different type of mindset. But, this is a hard passage, because we're all probably rich.
Yeah, that's another thing we ought to realize, is that we have better access to healthcare and food than Roman emperors did back during this period. So, it's all, you know, the definition of rich can be, you know, is very, and so I think that's why that's the important question. What is it about being rich? And I think we've hit on a lot of the things. It's you know, learning to trust ourselves more than trusting God. You know, learning to, you know, that's those types of things. It's 11 on that. Precious. All right. I'll get those. For the kingdom of heaven is like the land, chapter 20 here. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 in the morning, he went and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went out, and again he did at noon and at 3 and did the same thing. And about 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found the others still standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day doing nothing?" "Because no one has hired us," they answered. He said to them, "Well, you also go and work in my vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired, going on to the first." The workers who were hired at about 5 in the afternoon came, and each received a denarius. So when those who came were hired first, they expected to receive more, but they also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "Those who were hired last worked only an hour," they said, "and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day." But he answered one of them, "I am not being unfair to you, friend. Did you not agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who is hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do with my own money, or are you envious because I am generous?" All right. So, a lot to this parable.
I'm just saying, if I was one of those people the next day, I wouldn't come out till about 4 o'clock.
That would be certainly the way to think of it, wouldn't it? We do really work ourselves up over fairness a lot, don't we? We definitely say, this doesn't seem very fair.
This is not the American dream.
It's not the American dream. That's
and I've taken it to heart, and that years ago when I was hired on at Bell South, I was in my job interview, and the guy that was interviewing me said, "So, how do you feel about working next to somebody that makes more than you do?" And it was a union house, and yeah, if you've been there 5 years, you were top paid.
right.
And I said, "It's none of my business what they make. What is my business is what I make." And I kind of attribute it back to this. It's like, you know, I'm thankful for what I get. If you get more, that's your business, not mine.
All right. And I think that's certainly the right attitude here, right? I think that's the attitude that you know would say. One of the things that's kind of interesting. This type of work was very common in this time period, where you did have workers around that would be hired by it was typically agriculture like this, and you would have a group of people that would basically make themselves available to work and would be hired as day laborers, during a time of increased need, like a harvest or something, where you would have a situation where you would have an increased temporary need. And this was not, a denarius that the ones who worked all day were paid, was kind of just getting by wages. That's a way to think about that. It was not, they were not getting a lot of money, and so these people, the ones that were hired at 8 in the morning, or 6 in the morning, or whether it would be 6 in the morning in the Hebrew clock, and worked 12 hours, would have worked very hard. They would have put in a hard day's work and gotten a fair wage, but it would have been a hard wage. It would not have been, it would not have felt like they weren't underpaid. They would not have felt like they were overpaid. They felt like, okay, this is, we made it. We got what we needed. Hopefully tomorrow. And another thing that's about people who did this kind of needed to get hired every day. You know, they kind of, you know, to survive. You know, they, you know, because again, they weren't getting wealthy out of this. It wasn't, you know, I was for whatever reason, I don't know any of y'all ever watched The Greatest Cash, which is kind of a fascinating lifestyle of people who live that. Now, the difference there, though, is they make a pretty good amount of money for about 2 or 3 months of very, very hard work, or the deadliest catch. I said the greatest catch, the deadliest catch. You know, for very, very hard, it's very, very hard work, but they do make a lot of money for 2 or 3 months of very, very hard work. But you know, that was not the case here. You know, that this was they were just making getting by money for very, very hard work. And so, as Beth said, it had been nice to have been able to just pull this off by working an hour. You know, that means, you know, if I can do that, I can have a lot of time off if I can find a way to get hired at 5 o'clock every day. You know,
Scott, this kind of reminds me of Jonah. He didn't think it was right. The Assyrians received mercy.
right?
And I think that's kind of the thing here. Is sometimes we don't think some people should receive mercy.
Oh, I think that's a huge application. Yes. I think you're absolutely correct. I think, you know, sometimes we definitely fall in the trap of, you know, I've been going to church all my life, and this guy got to live it up for 20 years, and, you know, I mean, shouldn't I be treated as a better Christian than this guy? Or, you know, and I think we definitely have, you know, there's a lot of applications to this, I think, where we you know, God's generosity here, and notice that's the term he uses at the end. He doesn't talk about, he doesn't even address the justice, you know, or not directly. I mean, he does say, the way he addresses the justice is to say, you all got paid what you agreed to work for. You know, I told you I'd pay you this. You said that's great, and you went out and worked, and I paid you that. I did exactly what I said I would do. But the thing he points out is this is not as much about justice or fairness, which is what you want to make it about. It is about my generosity. You know, and you know, like we did with the parable of the unforgiving servant. You know, the gift is infinite. You know, none of us really are getting. We're all getting more than what we deserve. You know, so to try to compare, okay, maybe I deserve this a little bit more than this person does is again the wrong way to be thinking about this. Yeah, but I think it's a real powerful lesson. Do you have your?
Well, maybe the guys who objected are used to the merit system, and God's saying He's on the mercy system.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think one of the reasons why we go to that system is the merit system really, in a sense, breaks down when we deal with the generosity of God. We know we don't have enough merit. Because again, it would be His generosity. He uses the term generosity. They weren't thinking at the time, but at 6 o'clock in the morning, they thought he was being generous in the morning because he was going to pay them a denarius. You know, they felt he was the landowner was being generous. You know, that what changed their mind? The fact that they found out he was going to give somebody else more for less work. Well, that's that the generosity still existed.
But you should never discuss your paycheck with another employee.
Say that again.
You should never compare your check to another employee.
I agree. I think that is something we should never worry about. We should, and I know we've all been guilty of that. I actually just popped in my head something I was a little bit upset about the other day. That I was probably guilty of realizing that somebody was Well, never mind.
With the Christian application of this Old Testament verse, it's not Old Testament, excuse me, it's Matthew. But anyway, my point is, when someone, let's say they're in prison and they come to Christ, are we not rejoicing? Or is anybody? I've never known anybody to say, well, that's not fair. He's getting to go to heaven now because he's repented of his sins.
Right.
Never said that.
Right.
It's always been rejoicing that, hey, he's going with me.
That's right. And again, I think we definitely, that is exactly how we're supposed to react to that. We're not supposed to look at, and again, if we look at our lives this way, we're missing other points too. But look at the fact that he lived a life that he did not have, did not live by the same rules we lived under. I guess, for lack of a better way to say it.
People seem to forget that there's only one sin that we cannot be forgiven for. And I had someone tell me one time that it was easier to be forgiven for murder than it was for divorce. And one sin is equal to another.
I think they're both pretty easy to be forgiven.
Yeah.
I mean, if not, we're all, as far as
we're all sinners.
Our work to get forgiven.
Yeah.
It's, because God's doing the work.
Not to judge somebody else.
Do you have your hand up, Bob?
Yeah, it's been touched on here, but my problem with this is it says the kingdom of heaven is like this. And like James was saying, it seems like we rejoice, when someone at the last hour of their life comes to Christ. And so how does this parallel with the kingdom of heaven? Perhaps the Jew-Gentile thing, that the Jews felt.
I do think there is a Jew-Gentile, I think there is a facet of that, because certainly that's what the Jews, what was the Jews' primary complaint with the Gentiles in the early church? It was, we had to be circumcised. We had to follow the old law. We had, we should get some sort of reward for that. We ought to get some sort of benefit for the fact that we had to do all these things, and you all got to be, adulterous pagans until you found Christ. You could do whatever you wanted, and we ought to get some sort of benefit. The fact that we didn't, just completely reject God that way, or there's, which is the flaw. There's some sort of, we feel there's some sort of level that we didn't reject God as much as somebody else did, because our sins, by our measure, are not as great. Obviously, and I don't even want to discuss the whether or not it's true, but there was the rumor that came out, and obviously I do not at all. His heinous acts were unbelievable, but that Jeffrey Dahmer, went through some sort of conversion experience towards the end of his life, and I certainly hope that he did. And I do I think it's possible? Well, certainly. That is, and we hope that did happen. But there's certainly a desire for us to also say, how can he be forgiven? What he did was so horrific, and it was, and I do not deny that. But I do think the God that forgives us of our sins can forgive anyone of their sins, and if they do come to him. We are probably over, aren't we? I'm sorry. And we're in Matthew 20. As I mentioned, I'm not going to be here next week. Are you going to be able to?
I am going to pinch hit.
Okay. All right. So Randy will pinch hit for me next week. We'll talk more about this, but basically he will have the open canvas of 21 through the Garden of Gethsemane, basically. Anything he wants to talk about in there, he can talk about. So, and then the last week of the quarter, which will be the week after that, I'll do the crucifixion and the resurrection.
We know how it is.
Well,